So this is a transition information really between that last meditation and the final meditation, which is the retrieval of the ego child. So the last part of that meditation was very powerful. Did you experience the peace of the Christ? Now, part of all this procedure is to bring to your awareness the difference between the inner child, the soul child, and more importantly, the ego child. If after this procedure no awareness has occurred, it would be wise to repeat it. Have you contemplated what the three aspects mentioned are to you? Have you contemplated their activity? Have you assimilated the context of the ego child? The psychology of the centers will help with this. So first consider the ego child. One major aspect of the ego child is control. The control of the inner child. The control of others to suit the ego child's wishes and desires. Now consider also that another part of the ego child is the patterns and behaviour learnt from the ego child of others. Just simply go shopping to realise some of these. You have been transmuting the ego child. Another concept for you to consider is that the ego child is a byproduct of the inner child. It is that part of the inner child that has gone astray, that has been lost in misunderstanding, has been led down the path of materialism. So it is reasonable to consider that the ego child may require healing, the same as the inner child. But as mentioned, the ego child is only the duality of the inner child. The ego child is the lower aspect of the inner child. Through your awareness, there may have been a void whereby the power of the ego child has lessened. It needs to reconnect to the inner child. By that I mean the part of the inner child that has been lost into the ego child. There also needs to be given an understanding to the ego child. This concept may be difficult for you to understand, as your thinking will have seen the inner child and the ego child as separate. One desirable, the other undesirable, but they are both part of your one life as a whole. The one life as a whole does not destroy humanity. Energies are given which will have an effect upon the evolution of humanity, as that concerns the evolution of the one life, because humanity is the fourth kingdom. 3 below, 3 above. They are all part of the overall one life. So adapt this understanding to the ego child. Also consider in its efforts to control, it can wield a lot of force, and that force can be transformed into energy. These two terms relate to the way energy is used. Control uses the energy of force. It can be very powerful, but that energy to good use, then you can see a relationship between the ego child and Shambhala that needs to be given back to the inner child in full consciousness. Because if the ego child is very powerful, then the inner child will have lost power. And in such a way that when the balance returns, the ego child will have become the earthly child, something totally different. The ego child technically is more powerful in the lower centres, although it will have penetrated the lower subplanes of the higher centres. So again, one may force a black and white situation, a yes or a no. The ego child, the inner child. They are both on the same continuum, so they are part of the same thing. Can you find other analogies? Now, the ego child has its thinking within a very narrow band that is separatist. Therefore it stands alone from the inner child, soul, and the earthly child, earth. In short, it does not embody the soul or the earth. Regarding the earth, it will not consider the lower kingdoms. It just sees its own life and affairs. So what now needs to be done is to reconnect the ego child to the inner child and the earthly child, and heal it of its patterns and behaviours. I'll leave it there. There is a little bit before the last meditation. It's well worth listening to that a few times. Different concept. Okay, then on the next one, we'll enter into the last one, retrieval of the ego child. Then there is a final message.